Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to start another episode of our Board Talks, a platform to support professional development and exchange of experience between CEOs and presidents, where the most relevant topics of interest to the international market can be discussed. The goal of this show is being an informal and short conversation about a very current topic every week. Today, we're going to talk about the health tech business and the role of startups in the healthcare industry. It is with great pleasure that I present Dr. Nuno Lopes, a startup investor and a very good CEO. Our interviewer today to share a little of his experience on the health tech. Nuno, thank you very much for your presence here. And I will start to ask you, what is, in your opinion, the importance of the market of health tech and as it interconnects as a bridge between health services and health professionals?
Thank you, Diogo, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And what you missed to say is that I actually don't operate in the health market. I operate in the payments space and the money movement space. So my opinions may sound a little bit more generic, but actually I am in a sector with a lot of technology. So I'll use some ideas from my own scope. So when you say health tech, there's the last part of that word that is tech, and tech means more possibilities. Tech means that you have capabilities that will be potential disruptors, and disruptors in the sense that you can do a number of things that wouldn't be feasible before. And when you have the possibility to apply technology, and in this case, in the health industry, you definitely create some economic advantages potentially. Let's think about the very basic case of doing telemedicine, so consultations online as opposed to having to travel to a certain location and have it personally. So there's a lot of economy in time and in money and resources associated to that. That's a simple idea, but it can be expanded into a number of things. So if you need an algorithm to assess a number of possibilities for a symptom a patient has, that means that you'll probably get a faster response, perhaps more accurate, and consuming way less resources than many different professionals doing the same job. So the importance of the health tech market is actually the importance of providing better services to the society in general at a better cost equation and making it more accessible. In the end, that happens to every industry that has been disrupted by technology. In my case, I talk about fintechs, but I think health tech gets the same sort of logic going on.
Absolutely. It's all about efficiency. And I always tell my students that normally the R&D is already worried with discoveries, but what we do need to worry is with innovation, which is the translation of a discovery to a commercial asset. So, and health tech is one of the perfect hubs to do that. So the other point I would like to explore and pick your brains on would be, what would be the major economical advantages of applying this technology into the health area from an economical standpoint, or in a very pragmatical way? What parallelisms can you do between your fintech industry and the health tech industry in terms of sustainable competitive advantage and economical advantages?
Well, let's say that you probably know Moore's law. If you don't, well, you do, but if some viewer doesn't, just Google it. But it basically says that the growth of technology is exponential, and in short periods of time, you'll have much more computing power at a lower cost point. And what that brings is the fact that it's much cheaper to invest in capabilities now than it was in the past. So if you talk about back in the 90s, in order to create a venture, a startup, regardless of the industry, banking, health, you would need many, many millions just to get started. And that doesn't happen now, because with cloud computing, with algorithms, with all this disruptive technology, machine learning, IoT, man, I can just keep going, 3D printing, the cost of those technologies is low enough to allow many startups to acquire those capabilities and be out in the market with something very relevant, and that just brings more players into the competitive field. So what it does, you have more competition, you have more innovation, and you have potentially a better economic equation for all the market, for all the users. So the access to technology is what makes a difference. And because it's exponential, it's going to be cheaper tomorrow than it is right now. So in fact, we should see more companies being able to come to the market, be created, and bring novelty. And that applies to any industry, also in health.
And there will be integral vertical integrations for sure, and a hell of a value chain that is disrupted by technology.
Both in the end, you bring consolidation, right? Because when you have many players doing good things, you also have the temptation to start acquiring some companies and making the whole business bigger. But yeah, that's a second derivative.
And you can absorb your competitors and absorb your core competencies. So that's that could be the title of another show, where I would have the pleasure to invite you again. From a geographical standpoint, just a quick question. How do you see Brazil? Because I know today you live in Brazil. And how do you see Brazil as one of the hubs of technology? Do you see that it has a competitive advantage, a competitive disadvantage? How do you see Brazil, let's say, coping with technology today?
I think Brazil is actually one of the most advanced markets in the world in what concerns the adoption of technology. I mentioned in the beginning that I come from the payments / financial sector. And the sort of advancements that we see in Brazil when it comes to open banking, cryptocurrencies and blockchain, real-time payment networks, it happens faster and at a bigger scale than anywhere else can see in the world. So I'll give one example, open banking. Brazil already has 5 times the volume that the UK has, despite the fact that it came to the game years later than the UK. So the adoption is fast. You have a large population that is quite savvy in terms of the usage of technologies, and with very considerable economic potential. So I think it's the perfect market to create disruption. And it's not by chance that you see the new banks of this life. A new bank is like the biggest neobank in the world, and it came from Brazil. So Brazil is, in fact, a nursery for big disruptors, and one of the markets where you will see a faster adoption of technology in general. And I think the same happens in the health sector.
Yeah, absolutely. When normally the technology curve is an S curve, right? And when the products are delivered from that S curve, the markets that thrive are the markets who have the more statistical significant data on early adopters. And what you're saying is that Brazil is a nursery of early adopters for techs, and for sure the same in health techs. I remember that in ophthalmology, for instance, there is one of the largest per capita number of ophthalmologists in Brazil, and telemedicine is one of the widely used of telemedicine is in Brazil. So it's actually very interesting. So on the downside,
you mentioned one factor that I failed to bring to the discussion is the dimension of the country itself. So many times the technology brings the user closer to the service because you don't need to dislocate. You mentioned telemedicine, so it's very relevant for a market of this size where you have locations that are very remote. So you have a need for this kind of disruption technology to fulfill a gap.
Yeah, absolutely. There is absolutely a need. And speaking on that as well, how do you see the impacts of course, the pandemic on the healthcare or the health tech or the techs in general growth? What restraints can you see, and most interestingly, what opportunities can you see?
Yeah, so definitely, despite all the bad things that we all know about COVID, and from a health standpoint, it was a disaster, but from the advancement of the digital transformation, it was actually a catalyzer. So in fact, what we saw was a mass adoption at a much faster pace of all kinds of technologies. So one of them being this one we are using right now. So everyone got used to working virtually. That's one. And even though everyone had Teams or something equivalent before, they were not using that for more than half of their days. But that doesn't stop there. I just gave you an example that is very of the day-to-day, but when it comes to the kind of business that I'm in, e-commerce exploded because simply people could not go to the shop and buy as they were used to. They had to order through an app or through a website the kind of stuff they would go to a shopping or to a supermarket before to buy. But that's not just from a consumption standpoint. Think about all the different merchants that were used just to hosting people coming to their brick and mortar store, that all in a sudden couldn't exist anymore. So they went online. Many of these small businesses, mom and pop shops that were not digitized, in order to find their consumers, they had to gain presence in the online world. So in fact, COVID accelerated the adoption of many different digital technologies, from this virtual conference sort of tools to e-commerce, of course, digital payments as well. People could not use cash to buy online, so all the payment providers saw an uplift in volumes because there was cash displacement. But in the end, it made everyone be digitized. And even just the last word, your kids. You probably saw your own kids playing video games much more. And why is that? Because before they could go to the playground and meet their friends, the playground became virtual, became the Fortnites and the Minecrafts of this world. So, it just boosted the adoption of technology in general.
And even on medical congresses, doing a parallelism, and on the medtech industry as well, people and medical doctors and all their health professionals went to congresses. But if you didn't go to congresses, your learning curve would be a lot hurt. But now the access to go to any medical congress is there. You can be on your shorts, on your trunks, and just doing a lecture, and without paying a 10K trip to Hong Kong and staying in a fancy hotel and with jet lag and so forth, and your family thanks it. So it's quite an incredible change with low resistance and a lot of resilience. But
the airline industry didn't like it as much, but that's another thing.
You're right. On another point of view, and to wrap up, in a society that is increasingly protected in terms of personal data, how do you think that the techs are going to comply with the ever-going and surging everyday legal duties and more legal protections and legal constraints? So what would be your opportunity as well, and basically opinion regarding how these restrictions on security of personal data could be a little bit overcome and a little bit more efficiently played, because for sure they are important, but sometimes they are not well applied.
I wouldn't even call it restrictions. I would call it responsibility, because in fact, it's an underlying premise. You cannot operate if you don't comply to all these privacy protection policies, because in the end, in the digital world, what you are transactioning is data, and you are giving some company the responsibility over your data because you trust this company. So if there is a breach, there's a breach in trust more than a breach in data, and the company will run out of business from one day to the other if people cannot trust that the company will be responsible. So I would say, you know, it's like a basic principle. Either you have it and you're in the game, or you're off the game. It's as simple as that. So if some startup wants to come into the market without having at its core data protection, it's better to give up, because, you know, they won't do anything else after the first situation.
Natural selection will occur.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, Nuno. Our time is off, and thank you very much, Nuno, for all your thoughts, for being able and vulnerable to me picking your brain, and to participating, most of all, to these board talks on this second edition. And thank you very much to everyone that is assisting to us. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. My privilege. Bye-bye.